Hey folks, thanks for watching my monologues. In case you haven't heard, I'm told there's an election coming up pretty soon. In some areas, there's a lot of violence and civil unrest. If you're in the market for personal protection for yourself or your family, I'd encourage you to visit Guns Etc. Guns Etc. is 10,200 square feet and they have product. And they're getting new product all the time. They'll work with you to get the exact type of protection that fits your needs. Stop by their store in Mesa or visit gunsetcetera.com where you'll have access to over $400 million worth of firearms and accessories. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to 960 The Patriot's YouTube channel. Welcome back and happy October 1st, 2020. You'll recall the contretemps at the New York Times where the editor of the editorial page was forced to resign over its publication of an op-ed by Tom Cotton. You'll recall the op-ed Tom Cotton wrote was in support of using the Insurrection Act to quell riots, the same acts President Eisenhower and Kennedy used to enforce civil rights. You'll recall there was a Twitter firestorm over it and a staff firestorm at the New York Times, thus the editor's resignation. Over New York Times op-eds published by Taliban and Palestinian terrorists, by Vladimir Putin, no staff were shaken. There was no employment shakeup, and all seemed just fine and dandy. This morning, the New York Times published an op-ed by Regina Ip. Miss Ip is a puppet of the Chinese Communist Party situated in Hong Kong. She opens her op-ed with the following sentence, quote, "No amount of outcry, condemnation, or sanctions over the Chinese government's purported encroachment in Hong Kong's affairs will alter the fact that Hong Kong is a part of China," close quote. In China's efforts to put down the democratic protests in Hong Kong, Miss Ip writes, quote, "Something had to be done, and the Chinese authorities did it," close quote. Sounds a little like Nancy Pelosi's statement that people will do what people will do in response to rioters' actions here. Something had to be done to stop the people of Hong Kong from singing the Star-Spangled Banner and waving American flags in their efforts to get China to back off their suppression in Hong Kong. And China did it. In typical tyrant fashion. Arrests, brutal police beatings, and ever greater surveillance. Or as Amnesty International reported, quote, "torture and other ill treatment in detention," close quote, torture. U.S. Senator, no. Terrorists, leaders of regimes like Russia and Iran, yes. And apologists for China's brutality, yes. Will anyone at the New York Times throw a tantrum? Will anyone resign? Of course not. Why? Same reason. A year ago, Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey was forced to apologize in America for tweeting, quote, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong," close quote. He wrote that when protesters in Hong Kong were carrying American iconography and singing the Star-Spangled Banner. Seemed pretty normal. Stand with those who stand with us. Stand with those who stand up to communism. Stand with those who are bravely risking their lives and engaging in peaceful protests on behalf of their freedom. It seems so darned a normal sentiment. One can trace a line from John Kennedy's inauguration speech saying, "Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure their survival and the success of liberty." From that line to every inauguration speech I can think of echoing the same sentiment. In normal times, a tweet like Morey's would be seen as bare minimum, almost yawning, virtue signaling. But we forget these are not normal times. And Daryl Morey works in the National Basketball Association, and they have a lot of business in China. So Daryl Morey had to publicly apologize. And the NBA did more of Communist China's bidding last year. As the Daily Mail reported, Washington Wizards security confiscated protester signs supporting Hong Kong and China's Uyghurs. Philadelphia 76ers security confiscated similar protester signs at their stadium. 76ers, named after the city where 1776 meant something, namely liberty and equality. National Basketball Association, national, as in the nation, National Basketball Association, where players refused to sing the national anthem that protesters in Hong Kong sang at the risk of their very lives. The National Basketball Association, where players continually tell us how discriminatory our country is. That's the association, where players who make on average over $7 million a year, where over 80% of the players are minority. Now the NBA has Black Lives Matter statements and banners on its courts, and its selling of paraphernalia with the phrase as well. I wonder what would happen if the NBA tried banners, paraphernalia saying Muslim lives matter, or Chinese lives matter, or free speech matters, or freedom of religion matters. They won't, because they cannot. Why can the NBA not? As I said in July, there was a headline in an ESPN story that read earlier this year, quote, ESPN investigation finds coaches at NBA China academies complained of player abuse and lack of schooling, close quote. A few immediate things jumped out. The opening of the third paragraph of the story, for one, it read, quote, the NBA ran into myriad problems when it opened one of the academies in Xinjiang, close quote. Xinjiang? The story then went on to detail a little of what is going on in Xinjiang. The problem is a lot of us have been speaking about it for years. It is a modern-day concentration camp of a province. What the hell is the NBA doing in China, much less Xinjiang? Oh, you and I know the answer. Profiting. Still, I ask, because that is not a good enough answer, what the hell are they doing there? It gets us to the answer as to why they cannot allow support for Hong Kong, why they cannot say Chinese or even Muslim lives matter, or that freedom of speech matters, or that freedom of religion matters. Last year, the New York Times published a major series on what was going on there in Xinjiang. Let me read a little. But hold on, because it all gets worse, much worse. Here's from last year. Quote, the students booked their tickets home at the end of the semester, hoping for a relaxing break after exams and a summer of happy reunions with family in China's far west. Instead, they would soon be told that their parents were gone. Relatives had vanished. Neighbors were missing. All of them locked up in an expanding network of detention camps built to hold Muslim ethnic minorities. The authorities in the Xinjiang region worried the situation was a powder keg, and so they prepared. The leadership distributed a classified directive advising local officials to corner returning students as soon as they arrived and keep them quiet. It included a chillingly bureaucratic guide for how to handle their anguished questions, beginning with the most obvious question, where is my family? Where is my family? Where is my home? Where are the neighbors? Disappeared. All gone. One more part from that story. Quote, the authorities in Xinjiang have detained many hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and other Muslims in internment camps. Inmates undergo months or years of indoctrination and interrogation aimed at transforming them into secular and loyal supporters of the party. Close quote. Now, I say it gets worse because one didn't need to wait until last year to read this. I've been talking about it for years, so have others. And indeed, one can perform a search to see a Time magazine headlined 2014, 6 years ago, quote, Islam in China, Why Beijing Oppresses Uyghurs, close quote. One can see a headline from Human Rights Watch from 15 years ago. It reads, quote, China, Religious Repression of Uyghur Muslims, close quote. PBS did a story on it that same year, 2005, with an addenda about how China imprisons more journalists than any other country. But the New York Times, on their op-ed page, pays no never mind. They defend that country. And yet Trump is the one declaring war on the media. China, of course, has to try to cover it all up and dress it all up, and what better way than with dollars and one of America's favorite pastimes, sports, the NBA. Could there be a greater distraction than that? It is not the first time breads and circuses have been showered on a people or media to cover up humanitarian atrocities. Those of us schooled just a little in the history of the modern world know well what took place in Europe in the 1940s, especially the horrid story of the Red Cross and Theresienstadt. As Newsweek wrote, quote, When the International Red Cross was invited to inspect the camp in the summer of 1944, the Nazis were determined to hide from the world the fact that they were killing Jews en masse. The camp's directors forced inmates to build fake homes, shops, and gardens that would fool the delegation into thinking the camp was actually a thriving town. In fact, it was a Potemkin village designed for genocide. Close quote. The Red Cross wrote positively of its visit to this, what was called a spa town in 1944. Never mind that what the Red Cross and the international world was fooled about was, in reality, a collection center for deportation to ghettos and killing centers in Nazi-occupied Eastern Europe. Of course, the nasty, horrible secret really was that the Red Cross wasn't really fooled, as it was looking for something to fool the rest of the world with. Not the first time that happened either. We just didn't think it would be true in the latter part of the 20th century, much less the 21st century, or that something called the National Basketball Association would be a part and take a part in it, or the New York Times. What better way to aid and assist the cover-up in China and the depredation of an entire people than to help with the propaganda of the regime by hosting and promoting nice little basketball camps there in the heart of darkness, or publishing propaganda dressed up as apologetics? Reason 1002 as to why I keep saying never again is one of the greatest lies of the 20th and 21st centuries. Reason 1002 as to why I keep saying the au courant social justice campaigns are also based on lies. Let me pause here to remind that the New York Times quietly and without announcement revised serious and seriously controversial statements on their 1619 website, as the BLM movement did on theirs only last month. The first case was what they originally said about slavery in our founding, not a small thing. The second case was what they originally said about family formation, also not a small thing. To cover up, to conceal, to deceive. Let's call it what it is. To lie. Why am I focused on this? Because I'm not sure if there's a single professional athletic association that is more engaged in lecturing America on left-wing social justice issues and how bad America is than the NBA. And I'm not sure there's a single news organization more dedicated to painting the president a racist than the New York Times. And yet here they are today providing cover for civilizational abuse by a spokeswoman for the Chinese Communist Party, a party whose government is engaged in routine, actual crushing of dissent and routine, actual racism. I suppose when you have a movement founded by self-proclaimed Marxists like BLM and you painted slogans on your courts, jerseys, and commercial promotional material, you cover up the crimes of governments dedicated to deploying Marxist ideologies. And you eliminate the dissent of those in your organization who stand up for dissenters. So what to say about the NBA and the New York Times? We quickly run out of words and synonyms. Once upon a time, perhaps the words immoral, iniquitous, hypocritical, and shameful would have done it. But it's really too bad people, at least in professional athletics and journalism, as I now see it, and most of journalism at that, erase those words from their dictionaries, their moral dictionaries, starting with the word shame. I'll say it again. It's really too bad people just don't blush anymore. I'm Seth Leibson. We'll be right back.